Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to a video that I'm not quite sure how to name it yet. However, in the background there should be some Tiger 2 gameplay for you to enjoy. And it's the perspective of the Tiger 2 and kind of an explanation video on it. It has to do with certain improvements that I'm thinking on, and I know many people already are working hard on the forums, on their own YouTube channels and so on, talking about this or even denying the entire problem. The thing is this, 6.7 is a very important battle rating for me because it just simply lets me avoid the 8.0 matchmaker, which I think is not half as enjoyable as 6.7 once was. How did this happen? How did the King Tiger become a muppet, a not being feared thing? Or to make it a bit more drastic, how did it become a hobby for people to hunt down King Tigers? Or, you know, a higher tier vehicle that also suffers from that is the Leopard, again another German vehicle. It's a very complex story, so I hope you give me the time and the full length of the video to explain what I'm talking about with all the arguments that I have collected, with naming the problems and how to solve them very quickly by just changing a few numbers. Overall, we're looking at power creep, flavor of the month, changes of game mechanics, nerfs, buffs, overall inconsistency. Also, we're looking at a big thing in Tank RB, and that is the nation versus nation concept. There is another game out that can be compared to a certain degree to War Thunder Tanks, which is World of Tanks. And World of Tanks on certain occasions tried also to go for the nation versus nation thing. However, it became quickly obvious that it didn't work. And currently we are also looking at War Thunder and we can see that it has big issues. However, I don't think that they are not solvable. I think we can work around them, and there are a few tips and tricks that I can name that I did videos on. This is not a rant video, this is just stating things and what I think about them, and also showing up new ways. Many things and many of the things that I am about to say and mention have already been mentioned by other persons, are discussed hotly in the forums, and the reason why I'm making this video today is because I spent the entire day of playing War Thunder tanks at around about 6.7, the Americans, the Russians, and also the Germans. And it became quickly obvious that it was not so easy for the Germans for multiple reasons. First of all, the things that I mentioned are not in a particular order. They are written down here on a sheet of paper, and I try to make it as briefly as possible. The things that I want to mention is we need the Kugelblitz and the Panther 2 to go down to 6.7. The reason is Germany heavily suffers from the American, the British and also the Russian CAS to such a degree where they just have nothing equivalent to it. Just forget about the you know, bombs and also the cannons being very effective against the tanks that you're facing, compared to attack runs that Sky Raider can do, Griffin Spitfires can do, or Peshkas or the Su-6 can do, because those are one-shot rockets. German planes also have them as well, however just one launch of them and not multiple like the previously mentioned aircraft. So we have an inequality in CAS. The anti-CAS role is also pretty difficult. How can a Focke-Wulf compete with a Griffin Spitfire? How can a Bf-109 beat a Griffin Spitfire that is at low altitude? B109 has to throw all its advantages, has come down on the deck, and boom and zoom attacks, well, you know how those Griffin just turns around and catch you and, rip you apart. Anti-cars just can't be provided by the Japanese Air Force, but who plays Japanese tanks in the first place? Also, it's mostly Germans alone against the combination of Americans and Russian tanks, or flavored with British tanks, and all three nations have a decisive advantage in tank variety, tank efficiency, and even the heavy tanks of those nations are in one or more ways better than the King Tiger. The King Tiger was nerfed to pieces in terms of survivability because the fuel tank tends to explode very violently. Also, the long reload rates and times on the King Tiger are just something that should be drastically reduced. So when the power creep happened, we also got new tanks with better performing shells, Heat FS in particular, APDS, it got buffed, and yeah, then also we saw a buff to the 90mm Heat FS from the Americans that is also on the STA1 and STA2, and that now has not just 210 but 305mm, and that hurts the King Tiger really hard. Suddenly the armor, the strong armor, is now not as good anymore, and the King Tiger cannot deal with flanking fire early on in the match before it even has positioned itself. But nobody talks about this, and it's very easy to point at German tankers and say, "Oh, look at them, they're so dumb, they're so incompetent." Let's have a quick look at RRB. How is that different? German planes were numerously called by me very bad in terms of flight model, instructor issues, and so on. What does this have to do with German tanks? Well, stay with me for a moment. Why do German planes win so often compared to other nations when they have to face off? It's very easy. Other nations' players are not as disciplined, don't climb as hard, and just throw away very often their advantages, just throwing themselves into a swarm of German players that stick together and know how important teamwork is. And that means that also, together with the bomber spam, especially from the Americans, means that the German fighters stick together in a wolf pack, support each other, climb, and just try to play as strong as they can, whereas especially Spitfires throw very often their advantages away and go into a simple head-on or don't bother to climb or ground strike. That is the reason why German teams win so often in RRB. In Tank RB, the things are a bit switched around. There are objectives, such as the cap circle, and the cap circle needs to be captured or the entire enemy team needs to be killed off. First of all, Tank RB has to also deal with spawn systems, and the spawn point system is not the very best that Gaijin came up with, and recently they ran a test, and I think that's the forerunner of an overhaul of the spawn points system also in RB. I think it's about time. Again, what then can we further do to improve German 6.7? Well, there, as I mentioned, the Kugelblitz needs to go down, and the Panther 2 also needs to go down. Especially the Panther 2 very often was called out as being very good at 6.7. I'm sorry, 7.0. I have to agree. The tank can hold itself. However, it's not as good as it also was before. Same problem with the Tiger 2. Tanks such as the Vickers MBT or the Centurion Mark 10 or the Object Nano 6, they have one-shot shells against the Panther 2 and a stabilizer with a faster reload, and it's not just one vehicle in the tech tree that can flank around. So the King Tiger also lost the desperately needed support by the Panther 2 when the Panther 2 was up-tiered. Many people just refuse to go into 7.0. Why? Because of the constant up-tier that 7.0 receives into 8.0. The Yak Tiger's armor is not as good anymore as it once was against Again, power creep and compression issues. Also, both the Jagdtiger and the Mouse, together with the 10.5 centimeter Tiger II, are missing their APHE DS shell, which is desperately needed. Then the 10.5 centimeter Tiger II. If I'm not mistaken, in the description it once was said that this tank was a concept, so this tank never existed in this form, but Gaijin still, introduced it. So why not buff it now to a degree where it's really strong? And when I say this, I'm not just talking about the APHE DS shell, no, I'm also talking about the auto-loading mechanism that stood in the description, or still stands in the description, and also the stabilizer. And I'm not talking here about chieftain level of stabilizer. Maybe a simple Sherman stabilizer would do as well. So all in all, you can see 6.7, 7.0 is a level where tanks underperform. You could argue, yes, the RE251 is a very good tank, and to a certain degree I agree. The Heat FS shell on it is strong. However, again, the RE251 is a premium tank, so not everybody can afford it. A lot of people love to have this tank, but they still don't want to pay the high price of this tank. Remember, tier 4, very expensive premium tank. And it also doesn't have a stabilizer. And it just relies on chemical-based energy weaponry like HES shell and Heat FS shell, so it can't fire through buildings, obstacles, and so on. Furthermore, why has the Jagdpanzer V5 a battle rating of 7.3 when it's the tank destroyer version that doesn't have a turret? Why a 0.6 battle rating difference? Get the Jagdpanzer V5 down to 6.7 where it belongs, please. And again, Germany wouldn't look that bad. Jagdpanzer V5 being, fast enough to capture a point and maybe defend it against 1-2 tanks, then die, and then the German player could go into either another tank or a plane. And let's talk about the planes again a little bit and their strike capabilities. I'm really disappointed by the striking power that the F8 has. If you notice it, we have a huge variety of weaponry. There we have a 1-ton bomb, and yes, that bomb does the job, but you need to get it on target against the strong air support from the allies. But a suicide run could work. But you want to take out more than one target. Maybe they are standing together, like in my nuclear strike video with the 82 Skyraider, where I blew up 4 tanks with 1 bomb drop. Then the cannons. This vehicle can mount 2 MK103s, but with that it's so incredibly bad to fly. It's easier to fly with the 1-ton bomb and make a full loop than to fly with the 2 cannons. Then there are also the 14 PB2 rockets. However, they are very ineffective. 6 kilogram warheads, not very good. They just don't work. I think I never killed a tank aside from open top AAA. And that's one of the most versatile German planes that there is. Yes, we also have planes such as the Heinkel 219A7, and also certain other tech tree versions of the Do 335 together with the premium variant. Also the Tau 152C3 and the Me 410B6L3, they have MK103s. However, all those planes are highly unmaneuverable. They're highly relying on strafing runs that you can stay on target for a few seconds, because also the MK103 is very inaccurate, and one penetration doesn't kill the tank most of the time. Most of the time you're relying on burning down the tanks, and in the worst case scenario that takes you 3 strafing runs, or you get lucky. And again, those tanks are, or those planes rather, are highly vulnerable to AAA fire. They're highly vulnerable to Spitfires covering the area. And again, who plays Japanese tanks to support the German Air Force? And also the Japanese CAS is very, very bad. A few patches ago, the Japanese got a rocket upgrade on certain of their planes, but again, that's just one launch, and I tested those rockets. They're very hard to use as well. At 7.0 we have the Horton, but again, that plane is a gimmick plane together with the Arados. They are nice, but again, just 2 bomb drops. And the match is not long enough in Tank RB to go back to base, land, and get yourself into position again where you can strike again. At that time, the match is likely to be over. And again, we have tanks, when we look at the German tank tech tree, that are, you know, cursed with drawbacks. The Ferdinand, abysmal mobility, but it has the armor to withstand. Like the Jagdpanther, we are looking at a completely different approach to a tank destroyer. Both feature the long 88, but the Jagdpanther can't reverse because it's based on the Panther chassis. However, it's rather maneuverable and quick in a straight line. And I love the Jagdpanther, but again, in most scenarios, a tank destroyer based on a casemate is not as competitive as a tank. Imagine you're tracked or immobilized and somebody's simply flanking you. A turret helps a lot in this scenario. Then the Panthers, the medium tanks, again, they can't reverse, they don't have the maneuverability, but a bit of decent mobility. However, they are more like heavy tanks in their performance, but the cannons don't have the smack of other nations' tanks. And they are 6.0, not 6.7, and people don't really like to up tier their tanks. Then there is the Sture Emil, long reload, fragile, and not very often used, like the Norse one. So the Tiger II is the last hold before the 8.0 desert, and it was once very enjoyable. And how this tank became a bad tank, or a tank that overall leads to defeat, is a story that I can't fully cover here. Also, then we have the flavor of the month. New tanks that got introduced, like the IS-6 and the T-29 before them, were too strong when they got introduced, and they were just too easy and too forgiving to play. Especially the performance of the long 88 against the two mentioned tanks' armor was not very convincing. There were the machine guns and the optics that absorbed them, and even when you penetrated them, you needed more than one shot because the gun breach absorbed a lot of the shrapnels if you penetrated the turret, and even over penetrations on the cupola happened, which shouldn't happen. Also lower plate penetration on the T-29, well, there was this magic invisible wall that just prevented the shrapnels from killing the ammo rack or the gunner. Flavor of the month means that also the competitive thinking player base just simply shifts their attention from the German tanks towards the Soviet or the American tanks. And so what you have are better players in better tanks facing not so good players on average in not as competitive tanks. Also, the Tiger II was nerfed because in its survivability now there is a big gap between what it was previously, where it could absorb a 122mm APHE shell into the turret and still have 2 crew members surviving, and now where even a long 90mm APHE shell from American Super Pershing could penetrate the turret and completely blow up the tank by either hitting the ammunition or blowing up the fuel tanks on the bottom of the tank, which I discussed in Dieselgate. Not very nice, and I think that should be, removed. It should be removed from the Tiger II's HP thing, because it feels like it gets one-shotted and ammo racked all the time. So, shift of player base, shady Gaijin performances by introducing new premium tanks, the tank being one of the oldest tanks in War Thunder and being the standard, so every tank at the same battle rating had to be better to justify its introduction, meant that the King Tiger now has a very, very hard time. Rockets are too strong, and cannons and bombs that are used by the German CAS are not as effective as the multiple rocket launches from other nations' CAS. The nation feeling is as unfair as you could think of, and people refuse to switch to AB, to arcade, for trying out how the King Tiger would fit in a normal battle against other King Tigers, where aircrafts are not that much of a problem, and where the nation versus nation problem that's currently there doesn't exist either. Japan tanks are very unattractive to play at the moment. Not many players play them, and even less players bother to go into aircraft to clean up Spitfires, 82 Skyraiders and Su-6s and all other CAS planes. And even if they are around, it's not guaranteed that they are always played by competent players that really go for aircraft, that they see every aircraft going for them, and a Spitfire is still a hard nut to crack. Again, APHEDS for the 105 and 128mm guns mounted on the 105 King Tiger, the Jagdtiger, Maus/E100, maybe even the Sture Emil. When does it come? It's a necessity. Down-tiering the Kugelblitz and the Panther II to both 6.7 is necessary to give Germany a fair chance. Also, we need more, and I mean more, mobile, hard-hitting tanks. And I think it was both a false decision by Gaijin to make the Sonderkraftfahrzeug 234-4, the Packwagen, an event vehicle and not just a regular tech tree vehicle, because it really works good at higher battle ratings as well. Then also the inclination on that vehicle should be fixed so that it also can properly climb hills like a lot of the other wheeled vehicles. And many more things have to be changed. And then Germany 6.7 is competitive again. Maybe even give the Germans more CAS capabilities, add more rockets, make the bombs more effective, or the flight models more controllable to get the strikes in more effectively. And please improve the accuracy on the MK103. This is a long video, I know. It was a lot of rambling. I hope you still enjoyed it. That's all that I could come up with today. And, you know, if you don't like King Tigers, think about them, how good they were 2 years ago. So, and before I, just end the video, I wanted to show you an extremely funny situation in the M56 Scorpion. Look at the minimap where I am. Yes, I am reverse spawn camping. And that's the first one. T-44-100. And I'm just looking there. And just trying to give my teammates bit back-facing supporting fire. This is something no German vehicle can do the same way. And look at this. Look at this. Look at how the Russians ignore me. It's always said that German tankers are extremely bad. I'm standing in the open. If you just would look to the right, as usually I always do when I roll out of the spawn, I look left and right and left and right, and hull break on the Su-37, and the other tank just rolls on. This T-44 has not even realized. Despite my bad gun traverse, I can easily aim perfectly and make the double strike and the 4 kill. And now I am just going for the cap from the other side. Yeah. What do you think when you were this Russian tank and you received this kill? The kill cam. Like this Jagdtiger. How much value is still there for armor when there are not just planes but also tanks circling all around it? This is also, I think, where I say we need bigger maps. We need maps with long-range engagements. We need more players to actually make useful tactics work. In theory, working together and creating kill zones is a thing, but not in War Thunder. War Thunder is still a game, and it just shows off lately. And then also this SU-100 had no chance. 6 kills, it's fun, I'm looking absolutely awesome, but this vehicle also allows me to do that. That's the big difference. I can't do this with a King Tiger, mobility-wise. Cannon-wise, most of the time, yes. But you can see the big difference. When you see such a gameplay, it looks just completely awesome. And now even the Russian tanks looked not the best, or didn't have the best appearance here. But that's not the point. The point is, overall, Germany lags, and the biggest sign of it is the King Tiger. To make the German lineup, the German tanks, or the Germans in tank RB in general great again, we need an overhaul. I'm very curious about the solutions from Gaijin, because they obviously have to know the problem. Maybe the flavor of the month will switch again to Germany at some point, but until then, it's easier and more rewarding to play any other nation. So that's it for me today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this topic and issue, and give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other not just on the battlefields but also in the skies of War Thunder.